You could argue actually that product managers should really be called value managers because ultimately that's what their job is. The promise of that value proposition, what's the promise of the product? What's the value proposition, right, that you're going to realize when you purchase whatever solution they're defining and building.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
I mean, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and today our guest is Laura Fay. Here are 3 things you really want to know about Laura before we start. First, she's the VP of Research and Advisory for XAAS Product Management at TSIA. That's a lot of acronyms. We'll hear about those later. She was VP of Product Management at Salesforce in the early days of Salesforce. This will be fascinating. And she actually started her career as an engineer and moved into product management. Pretty fascinating. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
All right. First off, what is TSIA?
Well, TSIA is Technology Services Industry Association. So we are a for-profit research and advisory firm really focused on bringing research insight on operational practices to the technology industry, and in the form of proven practices, KPIs, people, process, technologies. And my area of focus, of course, is product management, specifically in as-a-service business models. So not just sort of, I'll say product management generally, but specifically, how do you hone and master what's appropriate and what's relevant and essential to thrive with an as-a-service model?
Nice. How do you guys make money? Who pays you?
Great question. Our model is a membership model. So companies, enterprises will sign up for membership of a particular research practice, whether that's X as a service product management, support services, professional services, subscription sales, etc. So we have a membership fee that enables membership, which gives member companies access to all of the research, the outputs, if you will, of all of the research on our online portal, and provides vouchers to conferences that we have twice a year. And we engage with companies in really kind of honing in on their strategic initiatives and helping them move forward. So it's really all about access to the data to help them with their models and their planning and their operations, conferences, and outcomes. So those are the elements.
That sounds fascinating. And so as we talk about pricing, and in particular pricing in the subscription world, you're going to be speaking from real knowledge, real research as we go through this. That's going to be awesome. So what do you do there?
I lead the research and advisory for X as a service product management for that practice. And so my customers are product management leaders in the technology industry, right? So we have a number of quite a sizable membership and growing companies that you would expect to participate. Some very big companies like IBM, like Microsoft, some born in the cloud companies like ServiceNow, Gainsight, a number of health tech companies, networking equipment companies like Cisco, and many, many more.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As a pragmatic instructor, I probably taught every company that you mentioned at some point in time, or people from every company that
I'm
you
sure,
mentioned.
absolutely, I'm sure.
Yeah, this product management space is absolutely fascinating. Tell me, I certainly have a strong opinion, but how tightly do you think pricing fits with product management?
It absolutely fits with product management. I mean, I kind of think of it as, there's sort of certainly an as a service, right? There's an essential 3-way partnership between product offers and pricing. And product management can kind of ignore any one of those at their peril. But, not all organizations are structured in a way that gives product management in the traditional sense, remit over pricing. And I think, as we look at as a service models, those things are a lot more interdependent in driving the top line growth of the solutions.
I think we'll likely get into this in a few seconds, but I think what you just said is amplified when you get to the expansion phase of subscription companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, was that the answer, or is there a different answer if I were to ask you, what is the role of pricing when we think about subscription type businesses?
Well, the role of pricing plays kind of has an outsized influence, I would say. And of course, to your point on this podcast, right, you talk about the interlock or interrelationship between pricing and value. And at the end of the day, in as a service, if you're not delivering value, quantifiable value, right, tangible value to your target audience, they're just simply not going to renew
Yeah.
and expand the relationship, right? So that tangible value, then you start to have a look at the conversation around how do you price that value? And we know there's a whole host of different business models. I mean, market-based pricing is really what the majority of the tech industry is practicing today, which I would argue in some cases doesn't serve them well, largely because most of it is not market leading pricing, but market following, right? And we know that that can tend to be a race to the bottom, which is unfortunate in some cases.
If we're going to compete on price instead of competing on differentiation and capabilities, then it's absolutely going to be a race to the bottom. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and the more you've seen it, right? The more commoditization starts to happen as a downward spiral, right? You got more entrants in the market. You've got companies now who, when you see companies putting pricing as a differentiator, like our pricing is lower than X, you're really in a probably a saturated, overcrowded, and very challenging marketplace.
Yeah, there's probably room for one low price leader in a marketplace, and that is not a fun place for anybody to play.
No, it's
So
not.
I don't know why people try. So what I find interesting about pricing and product management and subscriptions and all of this is I think, and I haven't figured out how to articulate this well, that understanding pricing and value is what enables a good product manager to say, this is what my products and offers should look like. Does that resonate with you when I say that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think about value as really the primary thing, right? And then once you've got a differentiated value proposition, then you can think about pricing that value, right? Assigning an economic value to that value.
Yep.
But you could argue actually that product managers should really be called value managers, right? Because ultimately that's what their job is
Okay.
the promise of that value proposition. What's the promise of the product? What's the value proposition, right, that you're going to realize when you purchase whatever solution they're defining and building.
So Laura, I have to say I've never heard that before, and the moment you said it, I tingled. That was such an amazing statement. Can I borrow that? Can I use it? Do you mind?
Go for it.
Oh my gosh, I thought that was just awesome. Well, let's talk about subscription pricing in particular. What do companies do? Let's say, what do they not do well when it comes to subscription pricing?
Well, the one that I've seen, to me, that's sort of the most egregious scenario is where companies, I'll call them traditional tech companies, long established companies of names we all probably know very well, and they decide they're responding to the marketplace pressures and pressures from their investor community that says, okay, you got to move to a consumption model, right? We want deferred revenue schedules and we want to see recurring revenue growth. And so you're going to pivot to that. And they say, great, we're going to pivot to that. Well, what does that mean for them? What are some of the typical things they do, which are not great? One of them is they take the pricing that they had perhaps on a perpetual license, right, with an attached service contract, and they say, okay, we're going to SaaSify this. And what I mean by that is they basically take the total amount of that contract, let's say it's $100,000, and an attached support contract might be $20,000, right? And under a CapEx purchase by an IT buyer, the total revenue they're recognizing that first year is about 120. Well, they'll say, well, great, we'll just turn that into subscription. So now it's going to be purchased with an OpEx from an OpEx budget, but they're going to include support in that. And they'll basically say, we'll give you, since the perpetual license is recognized over roughly 5 years, we'll just divide that by 5. So we'll give you an annual subscription for $20,000. And what's the problem with that is there are many problems with that. They have paid no attention to what is the value proposition.
You mean that's not subscription pricing, just dividing it by 5 and saying, here's your annual price?
Well, they might change the contract, right? So now it's a different contract. But the main point actually is, right, that you look at what's the value proposition. The reason they've probably done this is because their products are technology is getting commoditized, right?
Yep.
So they haven't thought through what is the offer, what is the value proposition associated with this new subscription offering. They've basically just done a math exercise and turned the pitfalls, of course, of this are many, right? They've basically taken a random price point to a commoditized technology offering with no consideration to the risk shift that's now occurred, right? The risk has shifted from the customer to the supplier, because now I have to pay attention to and care about the customer adoption in a way that I didn't before. And
yeah, interesting.
In many cases, I may have a cloud offering, so now I am taking the expense of the hosting associated with that cloud offering, which perhaps I didn't before. So I have additional cost, I have additional risk, but I haven't thought any of that through. And what is the new value proposition associated with this? So I consider this kind of a bit of a lazy approach, and it has actually proves out very well in the numbers. And this is where the research comes in, where we can look at some of these scenarios and show that they are generally not profitable. So the foundational dependencies for an effective as a service monetization strategy just really haven't been addressed or haven't been thought through.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it isn't really a subscription in all the things we think about subscription with customer success and making sure usage grows. And it isn't a subscription. It's just a contract that we've changed the terms of the contract.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And it's essentially what should be a complete business model shift, right? With all the things you just mentioned there, basically not factoring for that and just making it a math exercise and saying, we'll give you access to the same stuff, but now we'll do it annually. Oh, by the way, we'll throw in support as well.
Yeah. Quick question. I always heard 36 months as the number instead of 5 years. Do you see 5 years more? I'm just curious.
No, I have experienced that over my career, ranges anywhere from, I would say, 3 to 5.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Any other big pitfalls in subscription pricing? That's a huge one, by the way, the transition.
Well, that anyone who's in transition, it's big, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, before you answer the next question, for some reason, I'm of this belief, and you can correct me, I'm of this belief that everybody has already transitioned.
Not true. No.
What percent do you think of businesses have not transitioned that will in the next 5 years?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One, we keep a tabs on this through an index of companies and a series of annual surveys. And the current estimate is that somewhere between 30 and 35% of the revenue in the technology sector in general, right, is subscription revenue. There are huge, and obviously born in the cloud companies, that's 100%, right, who tend to get, by the way, more media and airtime. So it sort of feels sometimes like there's more in subscription, but there's some really, really large companies that still get the majority of their revenue from what we'll call asset-based licensing, right, perpetual licensing, both hardware and software companies. So it's probably somewhere around a third of all of that revenue today is subscription revenue. And that changed the last time, as of in the last 12 months, that's up about 10 points. So it went from literally like in the mid-20s to, around a third over the last year. And it's accelerating. So
yeah, we've had a lot of growth then in the last year, but there's still a lot to do.
there's still a lot to do. And the largest majority of that is large traditional technology companies who are on the journey to as a service. So they may have some offerings in as a service, but there's significant way to go. And certainly a lot of the technology companies in things like industrial equipment and in health tech, they're a little bit earlier in that transition curve as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How's the podcast going? Are you getting value? Research shows that people don't really value what they get for free. But I'm hoping you'll prove this research wrong. Please demonstrate to us and the entire world that you value this podcast. Would you please pause the podcast, subscribe if you haven't already done so, rate the podcast, and leave us a short review? You'd be doing a huge favor. And research shows if you invest this little bit of time, you'll probably like the podcast even more. Win-win. Pause. Do it now. We'll wait for you. Now back to the question I interrupted you while you were answering it. Sorry. Do you have another pitfall for subscription pricing?
So, I kind of think of one and as a service where simplicity is really, really important, right? And anchoring pricing to finding a value metric to anchor to, so that what the customer values is the same thing that the company is ultimately going to make money on, right? And because those two things then become aligned. So one of the pitfalls that we see, and I'm sure you see it as well, is price complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, we've all seen this in B2B, sales needs a PowerPoint deck to explain the pricing model to a customer. Right. And, the quote to price a B2B solution has, a formula driven spreadsheet. Or, another example is we've seen it where, you want to have a portfolio of solutions and you want to have certainly things to cross-sell, upsell and cross-sell, but it gets to a certain point where you can be viewed as you're really nickel and diming the customer. So I think all of these things, and there's a number of examples out there where your pricing is based on, the number of users, the level of feature functionality, the browser platform, the size of the data stored, and so on and so forth, or the number of API calls you have to make, etc. And so those are examples where I think customers often get frustrated by that, but also it starts to muddy the waters on just kind of really aligning the value metric to what the customer cares about and driving all vectors in that direction. That would generally be my thought process around it, and trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, I agree completely. Two companies that jump to mind at opposite ends of that spectrum. I would say GoDaddy has got one of the most complex pricing schemes. Everything is a la carte. And then the company that I love their pricing, I love LinkedIn's pricing. I just think they do a fabulous job because it is so simple for someone to understand. And yet behind the scenes, this is as complex as heck.
Exactly, right. So being able to, that's where the real value comes in, and being able to keep it simple externally and hide the complexity, right, behind the scenes, and perhaps automate that. Yeah.
Quick question. I use two different words, value metric and pricing metric, to mean two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, is it two different things to you, or is it the same thing?
Well, I think there's different terminology. When I think about pricing, I think about the pricing model itself and then the anchor, right? Mm-hmm. And the value metric would be one of the anchors. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I use the word value metric to mean how does a customer measure value? I really like your product because my blank went from blank to blank.
Yes. Exactly. We're saying the same thing, right? So it is value.
Yep.
What's the value delivery? And then the one example, well, there's probably a few, most of the marketing platforms, I'll just take HubSpot as one example. their value metric is the number of emails captured, right? So every marketing executive, they've emailed campaigns or they've marketing campaigns rather, and their goal is to maximize the number of contacts that they acquire through those campaigns. And HubSpot's pricing is aligned to the volume of emails captured. So that to me is that is a value metric, right? That the pricing is anchored on.
Yes, yes. And so let me give an example. I'd love to hear your opinion because you used to work there, Salesforce, for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Salesforce, if I could say the value metric to Salesforce, it would be a company's sold more, right? My revenue went up. But I would say their pricing metric that they use is number of users, number of salespeople on the system.
Yep.
Would you?
Well, yeah, that's exactly how they do it. And in terms of the anchor there, it's really feature function access by user.
Yep.
And that's a very common, as you've probably seen that, right? It's very common in subscription pricing. It's actually kind of a legacy holdover from the perpetual licensing days in tech, because it was very, you had a perpetual license and it was, the volume was based on by user. And so now that's just been sort of moved over into the subscription world. But to your very point, Mike, it's not aligned with a value metric.
Yeah, I think they're correlated, which is a good thing.
They are.
But they're not tightly correlated.
That's right.
And there are probably times where it makes a lot of sense to have users as the pricing metric. But I do think it's just easy. And that's why people use it. They don't think through it long enough.
Yeah, I think it's easy, and perhaps it's simple, to going back to our simplicity conversation, right? Easy for the customer to understand, easy for the customer to budget, right? I know how many employees I have, and I want to have all those employees on the system. So I kind of, it's going to be predictable in what my spend is going to be, et cetera. And with another interesting thing is that this pricing anchor per user is most typically associated with market-based pricing models in tech, which is really interesting because it's, as you say, it's correlated, maybe not highly correlated with the value metric, and therefore potentially perhaps arguably more susceptible to downward pricing pressure, particularly when the category starts getting crowded, right?
Yeah, that's interesting that you probably do end up with more pricing pressure because of the correlation's not as tight there.
Yeah. It's more focused on feature function versus value.
Nice. Hey, not that I'm putting any pressure on you, but do you have one more pitfall for us?
Another pitfall, boy. There are plenty. I think timing of, when does product management really start to think about pricing? And I think there's two parts of this timing that when I think about them. One is in the stage of company's growth, right? In the early stages, well, before I say that, so one is in the stage of the company's growth. The other one is during the value creation process. When do you think about pricing? So in the first, if you're a startup company and your goal is really to just grow the top line, aggregate users, and figure out how to monetize them later, then you're probably not thinking a whole heck of a lot about pricing, except to be, make that as low friction as possible. It's probably below market, or it's nominal. You're not putting a huge amount of energy into that. What our data shows, though, is that SaaS companies that kind of get over that 100 million mark start to think about how they monetize different parts of the portfolio, specifically the services portfolio, that they may be giving away services for free to grow the top line. So they start to put more energy and effort into pricing. In those scenarios, I would argue that it's really worthwhile for companies to start thinking about pricing a little bit sooner than that 100 million mark. So, because you want to have a point of view, I'm sure you would agree, it's never too late to have a conversation with customers and prospects, largely customers, about willingness to pay. I mean, doing that research and understanding the value proposition that's being delivered, and really, really getting to into a level of detail of understanding the customer process, how they use the product, so that you can start sort of doing that alignment of value and pricing. It's not something you can turn on a dime overnight once you suddenly decide to do it. So having a point of view on that earlier in the game and evolving it is pretty critical. And I see some companies waiting until they're so much bigger, and now they've got companies and customers hooked right on the low cost drug of whatever their product is.
Yes.
And then it's hard to change that. So that's one timing thing I think is a mistake. Another timing thing is only thinking about pricing at the launch phase and not thinking about pricing during the product design and the offer design phase, because they are interdependent. You might choose to move things around in how you put your packages or your solutions together, how you put your product suite together, and what features and functions and capabilities and use cases and value go into each element in the portfolio. And that's going to influence how you price it. But if you don't think about that till the very end, you're probably missing an opportunity.
The sad thing is that's not only true with subscription companies. That's true with pretty much every company.
That's right. Yeah. That's a universal one for sure.
Yes. Hey, do you ever use the word pricing roadmap? And if you do, what does it mean?
I use that to some degree. So when you use pricing roadmap, Mark, what's in your mind for that? Because I think it means different things to different people.
Yeah, I think of the fact that, let's say that we're in the expansion stage, we're trying to figure out how we're going to tweak our packages, or we're going to add new market segments.
Yep.
Every one of those decisions that we have to make isn't really a pricing decision. It's really a big business decision that we have to make.
Yep.
And so there's an implementation that goes on inside our company more than just, hey, look, I changed the price on this product.
Yes, agreed.
And so I think of it as, how do I let the entire company know what's happening so that we can go build this just like I would a new product and have a product roadmap?
Yep. Yeah, and we see that, as part of the ongoing governance, right, on the offers, on the portfolio, the modeling that goes along with that, and, when you iterate it in market, and it all feeds back. This kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier, which is this three legs to the stool: product, offers, and pricing. And you can't decouple those effectively and have any kind of an effective optimized solution or value.
Yeah. Excellent. Laura, I have had so much fun talking to you, but unfortunately we're out of time. I do have one more really important question.
Sure.
What's one piece of pricing advice you could give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business? And you can repeat something you've already said if you want.
I think I would say kind of talking to customers is a big deal, right? You can do, some spreadsheet modeling, et cetera. But if you're really going to build a pricing model on the basis of your value proposition, you've really, really got to understand at a deep level how the customer is getting value from the solution. And the deeper you go with that, the more articulate you can be about the value proposition, the associated price, should really kind of fall out of that. I mean, if you do have tangible value and you can do essentially an ROI type calculation for the customer on the delivery of that tangible value, the pricing should follow fairly straightforwardly. But it's really getting to that understanding.
I'll just say amen to that. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I think one of the, just going back to, I know we're out of time here, the mistakes. I think some companies, I see them looking at an important data points like historic purchase data, right, to feed that in. But of course, that's looking in arrears, and it doesn't take into account some of the inevitable biases that exist in that data, like sales ability to communicate value and discounting practices and various other things. But I think it's, the remit of product management to really kind of understand how the customer is perceiving that value that they're creating, and then leverage that into their pricing design.
Absolutely. Almost every one of my mentoring clients, when I ask them about customers and how they perceive value, almost every one of them don't do that. They have no idea. And I was talking to one the other day. They said I talked him into going out and calling a bunch of customers, and they came back and they go, "Oh my gosh, I learned so much. That was fun."
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I don't know how you make decisions without this information. So, Laura, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
You could send me an email, laura.fay@tsia.com, or you could find me on LinkedIn and ping me that way.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, there went episode number 26. Okay, my favorite part was value manager instead of product manager. I'm stealing that one. Thank you so much. What was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments or wherever you download and listen. And while you're at it, please give us a 5-star review. It would help us out a lot. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing, feel free to email me at mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.